This is Jim Fetzer in Madison, Wisconsin, with David Scorpio from the exotic land of Ecuador and Carl Herman from San Ramon, California. What we have for you today is absolutely stunning news. You're not going to believe your ears as we move forward. Biden-Trump campaigns dig in for a legal fight in relation to the key battleground states. Here you can see a map. Arizona has been called for Biden, but that remains contested, let me note, and is expected to go to Trump. Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. Here's a distribution of the reported voting pattern, but actually, the whole map really understood as much, much more red, very much left blue. Trump far more competitive against Biden than the media expected, but that's because the media were primed. The election between Trump and Biden is finally here, but what's most important is how tight it was and the fact that we have the most votes ever cast in a presidential election. Early in the morning, Trump declared he had won Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, which of course was not what the media were reporting, but which does, for reasons we shall shortly explain, appear to be true. Here you have an insider from Arizona declaring Trump will take Arizona and then win the 2020 election, which I believe is the case. We begin with Scorpio. Your thoughts?
Well, I wish I could be quite as optimistic about that. I don't know. It looks like Trump is only 0.3 of a point ahead of Trump in Georgia right now, according to the polls. If this goes to court and we go through all this litigation, I don't think it's going to bode very well because, the Democrats' mantra now is we need to count every vote. But Trump's trying to stop voting. And so, unfortunately, I think that's going to resonate with the average, Bubis Americanus. And but I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm wrong.
Well, the mantra is should be count every legal vote. And there are
right.
a vast number of illegal votes. Carl, your thoughts?
As we will cover with the breaking news, if you imagine that the Trump team was smart enough to recognize the opposition beginning in 2016, they're going to develop a plan to make sure that they set up and take this election and not be subject to the same ridiculous election fraud. One of my colleagues is Tim Canova, who went against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida the last two primaries. And the Dems absolutely illegally stole the election from him. So, as we're going to cover, I think this is a giant sting, a setup, and the biggest dunk will be to end the DNC party in infamy.
Carl, I think you got it right. Let's see what the developing news has to tell us. John Daniel Davidson, yes, Democrats are trying to steal the election in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I added a note. Proof that Democrats flooded the election with millions of fake ballots follows from the discovery that they lost some 22 of 25 contested House seats, which would have been impossible had the Biden voters voted the down-ballot races or a straight Democratic ticket. This means they were predicting a Biden landslide because they had rigged the vote to produce it, which also means, given how tight the races turned out to be, that Trump would have had a bona fide landslide had the Democrats not intervened. He makes a number of very telling points here that are confirmed from multiple directions. While everyone was asleep, after everyone went home, the Democrats in Michigan magically found a treasure trove of 138,309 votes, every one of which went to Biden. There was also something suspicious about the vote reporting in Antrim County, Michigan, where Trump beat Hillary by 30 points in 2016. You'd expect him to beat Biden by more than 30, 40 more. Initial vote totals show Biden ahead of Trump by 29 points, a result that can't possibly be accurate. I believe they just reversed the total, and the votes that were cast for Trump were given to Biden and the opposite. Then another mysterious all Biden vote dump happened in Wisconsin, where Biden miraculously overcame a 4.1 point Trump lead in the middle of the night, thanks to another vote dump, 100% of which went to Biden, 0 to Trump. In Pennsylvania, the Democrat scheme to seal the election appears to have been a bit different. Instead of vote dumps that went impossibly 100% to Biden, they're relying on the Democratic Secretary of State's plan to count indisputably late mail-in ballots as though they were received on election day, even if they have no postmark. How could it be simpler? Paul Craig Roberts, our nation's leading public intellectual, has reflected on the situation. When I turned in last night, President Trump had comfortable leads, considering the number of votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. I noticed was puzzled by the halt to the reporting of voting. It did not seem to me that Trump's margins could be overcome by the few votes remaining to be counted. This morning, when I checked, I saw Trump's lead in Wisconsin had been replaced by Biden's lead, his lead in Michigan reduced to a fraction. I also noticed neither Pennsylvania, North Carolina, nor Georgia had managed to count any more votes. It makes no sense for people in Michigan who've severely suffered from the American establishment's offshoring of their manufacturing jobs to Asia, thereby destroying the economic well-being of people in Michigan, to prefer Biden. I wondered if this were not another example of Americans being unable to act in their own interests. But what I found looking for explanations was astonishing. During the early hours of November 4th in both Wisconsin and Michigan, there was a sudden vertical upward adjustment to Democrat votes. And every one of the 150,000 newly found votes were for Biden. Absolutely stunning. If someone for someone like me, who with Dave Kranzler has watched the manipulation of gold futures, when a sudden drop of naked shorts drives down the gold price to protect the dollar, the sudden shift in Wisconsin and Michigan was very, very suspicious. Indeed, election officials in both Michigan and Wisconsin are refusing to explain the sudden Biden influx. Unbelievable. Vote tollers from both states spiked at around 6 a.m. Eastern in favor of Biden, according to graphs of 5 tallies posted by 5:38. Trump tweeted multiple times, claiming officials are finding votes for Biden all over the place. We've seen a number of elections already. The use of false graphics to indicate there's some sort of problem. Benson answered. However, she said she was unfamiliar with the specifics of the vote count and they wouldn't comment on this increase. That was in Michigan. Meanwhile, Wisconsin Election Commissioner Public Information Officer Reed Magley ordered a pre-election media advisory when asked for more information. She would not provide it. Why are we not surprised? Scorpio, your thoughts?
Well, there's no question there's massive voter fraud. As you recall on the Wisdom Circle yesterday, we had 2 different guests call in and say that they personally witnessed voter fraud in their states. One was in Nevada and the other one was in Illinois. So there's no question that there's a lot of shenanigans going on.
I think the other was in Pennsylvania.
They pulled off a fake pandemic. They're trying to pull off a fake election. I hope you guys are right with your optimism. The problem I see is they have the mainstream media, so-called, 100% behind them. They're making Trump look like he's crazy, he's paranoid, he's a dictator, he's going against our democratic process. So I don't know how we're going to overcome the 100% support of this fraud by the mainstream media.
Thanks, Scorpio. You're about to learn an aspect of this with which you are currently unfamiliar. Carl, your thoughts?
Yeah, Scorpio, that's a good question of what we're going to do about the corporate media, unless this has all been planned from the beginning to ensnare, to trap, to trick, prove the election fraud, and then take down corporate media with it. And the facts, we're still in a psyop, and I'm still sticking with Scorpio's appreciative pessimism that until we get a breakthrough with truth, it's still all at risk. But I'm excited about this show now.
Yeah, Carl, thanks for that. I agree completely. We need Scorpio to notice what's going on here now, because these are the stories I believe he has heretofore missed. Here's the logic and math behind Trump's controversial election night remarks. This is coming from Trump's own team. What you're about to see is one guy's summary of what Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, and his team said in a 3-hour election night breakdown of the numbers. Most of us don't have 3 hours to set aside and watch an analysis, but the video lays out the specific math and logic making the case. It turns out that, as we have claimed for electoral vote purposes, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which won't allow legal observers, the state of Georgia and the state of North Carolina, each one of which has a big Trump lead. Additionally, we hereby claim the state of Michigan. In fact, there was a large number of secretly ballots, as has been widely reported. Now, here's the key, Scorpio. We're about to witness the greatest military sting operation of all time. Here we have one tweet. Why did DHS take over from the Corrupt Voter Fraud Commission in the wake of the 2018 midterm election? Dems printed extras not knowing about a non-radioactive isotope watermark on the official ballots. Here's a more explanatory note. Election fraud update. If you've been following for a long time, you know the term watch the waters, which Q has dropped repeatedly. You probably thought it meant the Three Gorges Dam in China, but it was never referring to that. The watch the water intel refers to the watermark on the official election ballots. The original ballots are also registered on a QFS blockchain to prevent fraud. 12 states were targeted. The National Guard has been deployed to 12: Alabama, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Texas, Wisconsin, Tennessee, Washington, Virginia, Delaware, Illinois, and Kentucky. And they are now counting the official ballots. The Dems fell right into the trap of this sting operation, and Trump has it all. Fraud will be exposed for the world to see. Isn't it amazing how Amy was confirmed just before the election so she can rightfully take care of the business of election fraud? And this is only the beginning of the epic times that lie ahead. So did Trump win by a landslide? You'll soon see that he did. I sought additional confirmation. I found this article, for example. DHS announced election audit sting after contentious U.S. election sparks confusion and outrage from election skeptics. Another, this is John Michael Chambers. I can confirm the blockchain aspect is accurate from my source closely held to the Trump camp. I was informed of this 2 months ago, and Q has told us we have the digital theft under control. Q has posted this right after the 2018 primary theft. We mentioned the blockchain aspect on my election night broadcast. I think this is fascinating, and there's reason to believe this has taken place, and it's going to expose the reason they were predicting a landslide for Biden is because they were managing it with millions of fake ballots. But that the only reason the election is close is because there was a real landslide for Trump they didn't anticipate. And now the massive fraud is about to be exposed. Scorpio, your thoughts?
Well, I certainly hope all that is true. I remain, sort of agnostic about the whole Q thing. And, I'm more skeptical about this. I hope it's all true. I feel my intuition is saying something very nefarious is underfoot right now, but I would love to be proven 100% wrong about all of that. Believe me.
Yes. Carl, your thoughts?
Yeah, you got to take a balanced position because in this PSYOP, we just don't have access to the data, and we're looking. I have not heard any additional information of the National Guard counting anything. I did try to find additional information for Department of Homeland Security doing any sort of audit, but I didn't find it. It is still early in the game, so we'll see what plays out.
I certainly respect both of your cautious approach, and I'm only having my spirits revived from the massive return of the votes, which was so obviously unbalanced and unwarranted. No one's even turning out to see Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. No one gives a crap about either one of them. They were mediocre candidates from the beginning. Biden had never won a caucus or a primary before South Carolina. When Google came to his aid, he and Kamala turned out together in Arizona. Local reporters were dumbfounded. Nobody, not one person, turned out to see them. Meanwhile, here's Donald Trump Jr. calling it bullshit. Wisconsin voter turnout by year: 2000, 67, 2004, 73, 2008, 69, 2012, 70, 2016, 67, 2020, 89%. Totally believable. Meanwhile, 7 Milwaukee wards report more 2020 presidential votes than registered voters. Where Biden gets 146,000 votes in the city, Milwaukee is the bastion of Democrat support. But obviously, something is terribly, terribly wrong. VP Biden carried the 5 counties or precincts with 3,768 votes to Trump's 2,883, a margin of 885, or 8 times what it was in 2016 when Trump earned 1,904 to Hillary's 2012. The city of Milwaukee reported record turnout of 84% Tuesday. 342,144 of 288,833 registered city ballots. Biden defeated Trump in Milwaukee 195,034 to 48,110, a margin of 145,916. He won 80% of the city's total vote. Of the city's 327 voting wards, 90 reported turnout of greater than 90%. 201 reported turnout higher than 80%. But in 2016, the voter turnout was only 75. So Biden ran up gaudy margins in many Milwaukee voting wards. He won 588 votes to Trump's 10 in the 107th ward. Its 2 other voting wards voted 411 to 14 and 968 to 33, a grand total of 1,967 to 57. In the 114th district, the city's near northwest side, Biden defeated Trump 334 to 6. In the 117th, Biden won 465 to 9. Trump received 15 or fewer votes in 16 Milwaukee voting wards, including a total of 7,389 registered voters. Trump won 9 of 327 Milwaukee voting wards in his inaugural presidential run in 2016. So what we're seeing here is a massive stuffing of the ballot by the Democrats, and there's more evidence, and it's only getting worse. Meanwhile, DC activists are building to prepare for any post-election day scenario. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets in Washington, D.C. even before Trump prematurely claimed victory and promised a Supreme Court fight early Wednesday morning, as the outcome remained undetermined in terms of the official calls of states by, believe it or not, the media, which is overwhelmingly biased for Biden and the Democrats. Tuesday, hundreds of protesters occupied downtown DC's Black Lives Matter Plaza under heavy police presence, including hundreds of Metropolitan Police Department. Additionally, Trump has mobilized thousands of federal agents, including an unspecified number of ICE agents, to quell any problems there. Still, to protect and serve property in the area, the agents are part of a recently created Trump paramilitary force dubbed the Protecting American Communities Task Force, that also includes Border Patrol Tactical Unit agents which were deployed in Portland, Oregon over the summer. and more than 100 personnel from the Justice Department Bureau of Prison. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police Department has restricted officers' time off, spent more than 100,000 on chemical irritants, that would be like pepper spray and tear gas, and other riot control munitions. But it looks clear they're going to try to rake a protest, except it's being dragged out because we don't have a definitive result, and it's going to be settled perhaps in the courts, but certainly with an inspection of which votes are authentic and which are not. Scorpio, your thoughts?
Well, this voter fraud is outrageous. They're saying that 90%, up to 90% of the ballots coming in through the mail system are pro-Biden. I don't see how that is even remotely possible. The mainstream media is at the point where they're just lying at every turn. They've lost all shame and all fear of repercussions about what they say to the American public. It's outrageous. And they're in unison saying there's absolutely no proof of any kind of voter fraud. And searching for voter fraud is like looking for the Loch Ness monster. I mean, they're going all in on this nonsense. I don't even know how they can say it with a straight face, to be honest. And isn't it interesting, or convenient, let's say, that all of the swing states keep facing record high counts of COVID positive cases? Isn't that convenient?
Yeah, I think you're right. And Carl, I agree that we haven't seen evidence of a National Guard involved in counting the ballots. But I've got now multiple confirmations of the watermark. So, I mean, I think that's going to prove decisive ultimately and substantiate Trump's claim to have won those states. And indeed, as I've observed, unless he actually had won by a landslide, he couldn't have run neck and neck with Biden, giving the fake landslide they'd already arranged. Your thoughts?
If we have adults who are working behind the scenes, then you wouldn't miss this trick of setting up your opponent to just utterly destroy them, to put them in the history bin through election fraud. But it has to be through something that would be verifiable and independent and understandable. And Scorpio, you're right. Corporate media, I have never seen them so rabid, such ad hominem, straw man, ridiculous arguments. The DNC really turned into a zombie party by destroying their own base in 2016 and in 2020 by stealing the primaries away from Sanders. So we'll see what happens next in this fascinating political theater.
Well, it's
Great
nice
points.
that if the reports that I tend to believe are correct about the watermark, then that's a simple, obvious proof of whether a ballot is authentic or inauthentic and will be decisive. Meanwhile, unsurprisingly, crime is surging in nearly every major city in the battleground states, which are all, virtually every one of them, controlled by Democrat mayors in states with Democrat governors. Pennsylvania may have become the biggest political battleground, but the streets of its city have become a literal battleground with record homicides this year. In October, Philadelphia recorded 65 homicides, the most on record for that month. The city recently surpassed 400 for the year. Police believe they're on pace for 500 by the end of the year. That would rival the record set in 1990 of 505 homicides in Philadelphia alone. These are the black lives we never hear about. We only hear about career criminals who are killed when they charge the police with knives. We never hear about the hundreds of extra homicide victims because they were killed by blacks. Those are the black on black murders that are overwhelmingly predominant in the United States, where comparatively speaking, black on white, and especially white on black, are relatively rare and infrequent. Compared to 2019, the murder rate is up 42% in Atlanta, 30% in Miami, 20% in Dallas, 36% in Houston. San Antonio is on track for one of the deadliest years ever. Even Austin, seen a 40% increase in homicides. Charlotte, North Carolina's largest city, homicides have surged by 88% in 2019, already nearly matched this year with more time on the clock. In Phoenix, homicides are up this year over last. Indianapolis, its 200th murder. which crushed the record of 179 set 3 years ago. Ohio, about to break its record. Milwaukee, Cincinnati, or Michigan. When is crime not rising in a city like Detroit? Also rising in Grand Rapids, the home of Trump's final rally. Minneapolis, of course, is the epicenter of the breakdown in law enforcement. So many people scared to leave their homes. Homicides have nearly doubled. Thus, in so many battleground states, not just in pure blue states, Trump has the opportunity to make his pitch, and I do believe it has resonated. Meanwhile, this is a positive development. A California judge has ruled that Governor Newsom's directives on lockdowns, face masks, and the like are unconstitutional. A California judge Monday issued a tentative ruling in favor of two Republican lawmakers who filed an abuse of power lawsuit against Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom. Executive Order N6720, which Newsom signed in June, required counties mail all eligible voters vote by mail ballots, regulated the number of polling stations. The judge, a woman, Heckman, has issued a permanent injunction that prevents a Democrat governor from making additional unconstitutional orders. She prevented Newsom from signing any, but he still appears to be tampering with the state's election. Of course, it'll require a judge to decide which orders are or are not unconstitutional, except Newsom tries to get as much as he can done. As I have explained before, the problem has always been in these states what happens between the time an unconstitutional or illegal order is issued and the time it's finally rendered unconstitutional. Big surprise, many California residents are fleeing to greener pastures where they can actually make a living. California has also been among the harshest in its COVID response, denying basic rights to citizens, even attending church. This is all embarrassing in California, but a positive development. Scorpio, your thoughts?
Well, yes, I can confirm. I have friends that live in San Diego, and things in California are quite dire. Many people are indeed leaving. Gavin Newsom is the absolute worst governor in the history of the state, no question about it. He's drunk on power. He's out of his mind. And I liked the term that Carl used, the Democrats are the zombie party. That's a good one. I think that's exactly what's happened. They've lost all, reason to exist. They don't stand for any of the traditional values that the Democrats supposedly stood for. It's unbelievable, actually. And, as far as the crime statistics go, let's not forget that over 12,000 hardcore criminals were let out of jail in California alone because of COVID, supposedly. But what they were doing is just releasing shock troops onto the streets, essentially. So that's happened in other states as well. So it's no surprise that the murder rate is skyrocketing all over these Democrat-controlled states. No question about it. And, Newsom is deeply corrupt as well. He had a torrid affair with his campaign manager's wife back in, I think it was like 2012 or so, and, caused a whole bunch of personal problems from that. Of course, the mainstream media didn't cover it one bit, and it's down the memory hole. He's a wonderful guy now.
Well, you're making terrific points. And, California is a disaster area, and we all have connections where I myself was born in Pasadena. Carl, your thoughts?
Yeah, at Huntington Memorial Hospital, same place as me. It's still scary. The violence is real. And if you could imagine the whole thing of being called a non-essential, and that I don't even know what the data is going to turn out to be of how many people lost their income. But of course, violence is going to skyrocket. And the bigger economic picture, that if you just look up an interview that Jim and I did together going over broad economic data, the top 1% of income earners now make more than the 99%. So you have that with being called non-essential, with all the fear mongering. This violence is real, along with the shock troops that Scorpio pointed out, of being let out specifically, organized by money through Antifa and BLM. It's scary, crazy times. The California governor, through the Emergency Services Act, only has 60 days to do emergency services, and that expired in May.
Nice points from you both. Yeah, the situation is dire indeed. Meanwhile, the Michigan governor is making things worse there, getting to 6 months in prison if customers don't survey, businesses don't survey their customers for contact tracing. This woman is a monster. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is now requiring restaurants, barbershops, tattoo parlors, recreational facilities, and entertainment establishments to record the names, contact information, and visit times of all customers to aid with contact tracing. If you don't comply, you're threatened with a $200 fine, a misdemeanor charge punishable with up to 6 months in jail, and a $1,000 civil fine for violating the state's emergency order. It comes as Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer and her administration began backtracking on the state's latest reopening plan to tighten COVID-19 restrictions, citing rising hospitalizations and death. Meanwhile, distraught pollster Frank Luntz, who's an honest guy, declares his profession is done. Frank Luntz, contemplating his industry's major misses in a second consecutive presidential poll, declared his profession done. The results left Luntz feeling dismayed, especially when polls seem to be indicating an easy win for the challenger for months. The political polling profession is done, Luntz said. It's devastating for my industry. In a separate interview, he said it's unforgivable that public opinion surveys failed to correct the mistakes of 2016 and again underestimated support for President Trump. This guy's a very good guy. I previously reported how after the second presidential debate, he had brought together a focus group of 13 distributed undecided voters from 11 different states. And we asked them which of the candidates would do better with the economy by a show of hands. When he said Joe Biden, not a single hand went up. When he said Donald Trump, all 13 hands went up. Trump voters are hostile to pollsters because they think they want to make them look bad. They wear it as a badge of honor. They refuse to cooperate as a result. Measuring the breadth of support for Trump is tricky, but to get it wrong twice in a row by huge margins is unforgivable. Scorpio, your thoughts?
I'd just like to add on to something that Carl said before, that about, so-called non-essential workers. Who decides who is not essential, and how come none of the media has been laid off as non-essential? Not a single person in media has lost their job, and not a single government worker has lost their job. It's only the common hoi polloi that have lost their jobs, and this is outrageous. People need to think about that. It's not right. And as far as the pollster thing goes, they're trying to explain it away that, well, there's a lot of Trump voters that are afraid to express their opinions. And you can chalk some of it up to that. I totally agree. But it has to be more than that. There has to be a degree of corruption in this to be so far off and so closely aligned with the Democrat Party. I think it's more than just a coincidence. And the other thing is that this governor in Michigan, she's outrageous. People hate her. I know that from people that I know that live there. And the mainstream media is already talking about the need for more lockdowns, and Joe Biden has talked about this as well. That's what's coming if we allow Joe Biden to become our president. And even today, they had some doctor on the mainstream media talking about how, this is dire and we're going to need more lockdowns. It's a good short-term approach to stop the spread of COVID. So that's what's coming if Groper Joe gets into office.
Scorpio, you're right on all counts, and it's clear that the media was in on it. They knew the Democrats were going to steal the election with a massive influx of fake ballots, and therefore they were confident that their predictions would be confirmed by the actual vote. And it just turned out that the real landslide for Trump made it so close as to make them look no longer credible, as Frank Luntz is lamenting, but for the wrong reason. Carl, your thoughts?
Thousands of lawsuits. We'll see. We'll either get truth or we'll get another version of a civil war or Dr. King's activism or Gandhi's activism. I'm sure people are already planning and executing some actions for that discrepancy between basic constitutional limited government versus this unlimited dictatorial un-American government that the Michigan governor and the California governor demonstrate. For the pollster, Mr. Luntz, he's either too busy, like so many of us, or I'm sorry to say, a useful idiot, or he's providing just a convenient excuse to never check the official data with the official data, because we absolutely need the exit polls to demonstrate election fraud. I mean, that's internationally, that is a must-have tool to check to see if the election is accurate, is you have independent exit poll data.
Yeah, what happened to the exit polls? I haven't heard anything about exit polls.
I agree completely. The mainstream stopped doing exit polls, I think, so that they could have more control over the outcome. But it is a scandal. In other countries, European, they use the exit polls to decide who actually won and lost, and the tabulated vote merely for confirmation, which is obviously the right way to go. But our media is so massively corrupt. Here's an odd one. Vladimir Putin suggests he might quit as Russia's president. This is highly inferential. Actually, it's got an indirect argument here, say that he has asked for a new law that would allow him to become a senator for life. It would give him lifelong legal immunity. He'd continue to have state perks. Sources in Russia say the legislation, which is quickly moving through parliament, is a sign that groundwork is being laid for someone else to eventually rule the country. Well, eventually someone else will rule the country because we all have finite lifespans. But the idea that Vladimir Putin is going to step down or leave his office is about as ridiculous as the thought that Joe Biden would win an honest election in the United States. So I don't give that any credence to speak of. Scorpio, would you care to address it?
Oh, sure. I agree, Jim. I don't think that's going to happen. And, there's a whole, cadre of color revolutionary types waiting in the wings to take over Russia and completely decimate the country and undo all the things that Putin has done to the country, like pay off the debt, reinvigorate some kind of morality through the Russian Orthodox Church, and put Russia in a very good position if things go sideways in the world. There's just a lot of people waiting to undo everything that he's done, and I really hope it doesn't happen. Putin is not going to step down, not anytime soon.
You make such a nice point, because I would say what Trump is doing for America is like what Putin has done for Russia, and I think that's why he has shown a lot of admiration for Vladimir, which I have no doubt is reciprocated by him. But for political reasons, he endorsed Joe Biden, which put the Democrats in a bit of a pickle with all their anti-Russia rhetoric. Carl, your thoughts?
Who knows what's going on with Putin? I do love the Russian people. I was able to hang out with a couple of Gorbachev's advisors for a day about 30 years ago. And I love the culture, I love the people, and I hope that they have a good outcome over there.
Yeah, I believe historically there's a great affinity between the Russian people and the American people if we can only overcome the politics that divide us. Meanwhile, we want to hear from you. Send fan mail, pro or con, to liveneedtoknow@gmail.com. liveneedtoknow@gmail.com. Here we have some tweets of great interest. One from Sidney Powell, who's become very prominent as Michael Flynn's attorney. Trump 2020 ahead, despite clear voter fraud in Michigan to the tune of at least 138,000 votes for Biden that magically appeared at 4 a.m. That's statistically impossible. Democrats cheating in North Carolina, Georgia, and Alaska should have been called for Trump without fraud, at least. Here's another from Pink about it. What if I told you there were undercover feds documenting everything going on at polling stations all over the U.S.? All will be revealed in time. Vic Vega, there's no way the president, who's always been 5 steps ahead, didn't game this election scenario out. He was winning the election when 5 Democrat-controlled swing states stopped counting. When has that ever happened before? He set a trap. Something big and indisputable is coming. Rudy Giuliani, en route to Philadelphia with legal team, massive cheating. Real Donald Trump up by 550,000 votes with 75% counted. Will not let Philly Democrats hack or steal it. All those are very appropriate. We do want to hear from you. Meanwhile, we had comments on my blog. Several Dem state governments illegally changed their voting laws to enable them to cheat the vote. That is what these Trump lawsuits are about. Trump correctly predicted this would happen. Only state legislatures are allowed to change voting laws, not some random state official or politician. This is all clearly stated in the U.S. Constitution. What occurred in those Democrat-controlled states is a federal crime. Expect a lot of fireworks. And another. Readers of comments here have complained over my assertions that the American people are stupid. In response, I simply say, look at the record. The truth in my defense. But nobody can convince me that 70 million Americans voted for Joe Biden. They aren't that stupid. Meanwhile, final thoughts. Scorpio, yours.
Well, one of the headlines I saw recently is that Joe Biden has received more votes than any other presidential candidate in American history. Okay, sure. What they're doing here, this is the 2018 election template that the Democrats used and got away with by cheating. They flipped several seats, 4 or 5 seats in the House of Representatives using this exact same technique where, all the ballots aren't counted yet. Hold on. And then sure enough, a whole bunch of Democrat ballots are discovered at the end and the election results are changed. That's what they're trying to do now, and I really hope they don't get away with it.
Well, we couldn't agree more, Scorpio. Carl, your thoughts?
Well, I'm tempted just to say I know about as much of American politics as I do about the Vladimir Putin story. Who knows? We're going to find out. I think at the worst case scenario, we have about 6 weeks of dragging this through the courts. And to figure it out, I'm hoping for fireworks. I'm hoping for truth, and we'll find out.
Well, this is Jim Fetzer in Madison, Wisconsin, thanking David Scorpio from the exotic land of Ecuador and Carl Herman from San Ramon, California, for the excellence of their commentary. I appreciate their reservations, not wanting to get ahead of the evidence as to whether or not the president had a means for detecting the voting fraud. But after what he went through in 2018, where it was very obvious the Democrats had rigged the vote to regain control of the House, and look at the consequences that have attended, it seems to me a guy this smart, this politically astute, would take steps, just like those we have outlined here, involving watermarks and blockchain to verify, to certify that only legitimate votes are cast and counted. I expect major developments here, the exposure of massive corruption on a scale most Americans would have thought unimaginable. Stand by. We'll see who's right, who's wrong, but I'm betting on Trump to have anticipated and planned for the very outcome with which he must deal today. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest of what you need to know. See you then.